The Starlight Beacon. As Ethan stepped off the transport shuttle onto the bustling trading post of Zirinth, the cacophony of alien dialects and the metallic scent of ionized air greeted him like an old friend. He adjusted the strap of his equipment bag and scanned the crowd, his eyes catching glimpses of traders, travelers, and species from across the galaxy. "Welcome to Zirinth, the crossroads of the uncharted sectors," a voice boomed over the loudspeaker, barely audible over the din. Ethan maneuvered through the throng, his destination clear. He was there on a hunch, chasing tales of an ancient artifact whispered about in the dark corners of interstellar academies. His old colleague, Marco, had promised to meet him here with information that could lead them to the famed Valari artifact. Spotting Marco at a nearby cafe, Ethan made his way over, dodging a pair of arguing Norellians. Marco, a tall man with weathered features and a keen eye for trouble, waved him over. "Finally made it, huh? I started to think you'd chickened out," Marco teased as Ethan sat down. "You wish, Marco. You know I wouldn't miss this for all the tea in China. What's the story? Did you find anything out about the sword?" Ethan asked, his voice a mix of excitement and skepticism. Marco's eyes glinted with mischief. "Oh, it's more than just stories this time. I met a Valari historian. She's waiting to talk to us. Thinks you're the key to the whole prophecy thing." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Me? What do they need a human for? And I hope this isn't just another wild ban the chase." "Just hear her out," Marco urged. "She's over there, by the fountain." They stood, weaving through tables until they reached the fountain where a female Valari awaited. Her appearance was striking, with luminous skin and eyes that seemed to reflect the starlight. "Lyra, this is Ethan, the archaeologist I told you about." "Ethan, Lyra," Marco introduced. "It's a pleasure," Ethan said, offering his hand, which Lyra regarded curiously before shaking. "The pleasure is mine, Ethan. I've studied your work on ancient human civilizations. I believe you can help us find the Sword of Stars," Lyra explained, her voice melodious yet authoritative. Ethan scratched his head, skeptical yet intrigued. "I'm here to learn, not to fulfill prophecies. How do you think I can help with this sword?" Lyra smiled slightly. "Our prophecies speak of an outsider, one who is not of valor, who will uncover the Sword of Stars. You are an expert in uncovering lost artifacts across galaxies. Who better than you?" Marco chuckled, clapping Ethan on the back. "Told you it was worth the trip." Ethan sighed, a smile creeping across his face despite his doubts. "All right, Lyra. You've got my attention. What's the first step?" "We need to access the Grand Library of Valor. It holds ancient manuscripts that will guide us to the sword. But it's not accessible to outsiders," Lyra said, her gaze serious. "That's where I come in," Marco added. "I've got contacts who can get us in." Ethan nodded, his resolve setting. "Then let's not waste any time. If we're doing this, we're doing it together." The trio made their way back through the market, their steps synchronized. A new alliance formed under the starlit sky of Zirinth. As the alien sun set, casting long shadows over the bustling trading post, Ethan felt the first stirrings of what could either be his greatest discovery or his most foolhardy adventure yet. Chapter 2. The Prophecy Unveiled. Inside the Grand Library of Valor, a hush settled over the trio as they passed beneath towering arches inscribed with ancient glyphs. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment and dust, an aroma that Ethan found oddly comforting. Lyra led the way, her steps sure and silent on the stone floor. "You weren't kidding about the grandeur," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible in the sacred quiet of the library. Marco nodded in agreement, his eyes wide as he surveyed the high ceilings adorned with detailed frescoes depicting Valari history. This place makes the archives on Centauri look like a kid's playroom. They approached a secluded alcove where a tall, elderly Valari man waited. His robes were richly embroidered, signaling his high status. Lyra introduced him as Master Voran, the chief librarian. "Master Voran, these are my colleagues, Ethan and Marco," Lyra said, gesturing to each in turn. "We need your expertise to access the ancient manuscripts about the Sword of Stars." Voran's gaze lingered on Ethan, curiosity evident in his eyes. A human, here in the heart of our knowledge sanctum. Intriguing. "Very well, follow me." He led them deeper into the library, where the shelves reached even higher and the books appeared older. Finally, he stopped before a large, ornate book stand holding a massive tome bound in weathered leather. "This is the Chronicle of the Celestial Blade," Voran announced, his voice echoing slightly. "It contains what you seek." Ethan stepped forward, his hand hovering over the tome before gently lifting the cover. The pages were delicate, filled with elegant script and vibrant illustrations that captured battles and peace, stars and darkness. Lyra pointed to a passage. "Here, it speaks of the prophecy. When the stars align and shadow threatens the light, the outsider will emerge to claim the Sword of Stars, bringing unity to all factions. We believe now is that time." Ethan read the passage, then looked up, skepticism etched across his face. "And you think I'm this outsider because I'm a human?" "It's more than just your heritage," Voran interjected. "It's your ability to see beyond the surface, to uncover truths long buried. This has marked you." Marco, who had been browsing another section, chimed in. "Think about it, Ethan. Every dig you've been on, every artifact you've recovered when everyone else had given up. Maybe it's not coincidence. Maybe it's destiny." Ethan scoffed lightly. "Destiny's a heavy word for lucky guesses and stubborn persistence." Lyra smiled warmly at him. "Perhaps destiny is just the path we choose to accept. Help us, Ethan. Help me prove that this prophecy is more than just words." Seeing the hope in Lyra's eyes and the genuine respect in Voran's, Ethan felt a weight settle on his shoulders. He closed the book gently and nodded. "All right, I'm in. What's our next step?" "We need to decipher the rest of the prophecy," Voran said, pulling out several smaller tomes. "These texts will guide us to the location of the sword." The group spent hours poring over the texts, discussing interpretations and theories. As the night deepened, their conversation grew more animated, driven by the thrill of the hunt and the bond forming between them. Ethan found himself more involved than he had anticipated, drawn in by the mystery and by the company he now kept. As dawn approached, Ethan, Lyra, and Marco sat back, surrounded by scattered books and notes. Ethan rubbed his eyes, a grin spreading across his face. "I can't remember the last time I stayed up all night reading," he admitted. "Feels like college." Marco laughed, stretching his arms. "Except this time, we might just change the course of a civilization." Lyra's expression was thoughtful as she gathered the books. "Not just any civilization, but mine. And perhaps, through this journey, others as well." With the first light of morning filtering through the high windows, the trio packed up their findings, their spirits high with anticipation. They were no longer just scholars and adventurers. They were seekers of truth, bound by a prophecy that could alter the fate of worlds. Chapter 3. Whispers of the Past. The ancient ruins on Dravos were a stark contrast to the bustling library they had left behind. The planet, shrouded in thick jungles and relentless mists, hid its secrets well. Ethan, Marco, and Lyra trekked through the undergrowth, their equipment clinking softly with each step. "These ruins are said to be older than some galaxies," Lyra said, leading the way with a handheld scanner that beeped intermittently. Ethan swiped at the sweat on his brow, his eyes scanning the dense foliage. Looks like no one's been here for centuries. How are we supposed to find anything in this mess? Marco, who was lagging slightly behind, managing a large pack of supplies, chuckled. That's why you bring a historian and a human archaeologist, right? Between the two of you, we're bound to find something. As they approached a clearing, the ruins emerged from the vegetation like skeletal hands reaching out from the earth. Stone structures, partially collapsed and covered in vines, spoke of a once great civilization now forgotten. Here, Lyra pointed to a structure that resembled an altar. This is where we should start. The trio set up their equipment, and soon the sound of brushes and tools filled the air as they began to uncover glyphs carved into the altar's surface. Ethan traced his fingers over the etchings, his expression thoughtful. These symbols, they're similar to those in the manuscript. This one here, it looks like it could represent the Sword of Stars. Lyra leaned over his shoulder to get a better look. You're right. And see here, this passage tells of a great alignment. It could be referring to the celestial event we read about, the one that's due in just a few weeks. Marco joined them, wiping dirt from his hands. So, we're on the right track. Anything else here that could point us to the sword's location? As they explored further, they uncovered more inscriptions and artifacts, each providing fragments of the prophecy's truth. The work was meticulous and grueling, but the thrill of discovery pushed them onward. At one point, Marco stumbled upon a hidden compartment beneath the altar, revealing a cache of ancient scrolls. "Hey, check this out," he called out, carefully extracting the fragile items. Ethan and Lyra rushed over, their eyes wide with anticipation as Marco unrolled a scroll. The ink was faded, but the illustrations were clear, a map of the stars as seen from Dravos, with a specific constellation marked prominently. "This has to be it," Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. "This map could lead us directly to the sword." Lyra took a digital image of the scroll with her device. "I'll cross-reference this with the star charts we have. If we can pinpoint the constellation's current position, we can calculate where the sword might be." As night fell, the ruins took on an eerie glow from their camp lights. The trio sat around their makeshift camp, maps and digital screens spread out before them. Marco, ever the optimist, grinned as he looked over the data. "Imagine, a couple of weeks ago, we were just strangers. Now we're about to find a legendary sword and maybe even fulfill a prophecy." Ethan laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. "From skeptic to believer, huh? I guess there's a first time for everything." Lyra, who had been quietly working on her device, looked up with a smile. "We're close. Tomorrow, we should reach the coordinates indicated by this map. We might actually find the Sword of Stars." That night, as they slept in the shadow of the ancient ruins, the distant stars seemed to twinkle with secrets of their own, watching over the unlikely companions as they dreamt of what the next day might bring. Chapter 4: Shadows and Allies. As the trio approached the spaceport city on Vala, a palpable tension hung in the air, thicker than the industrial smog that shrouded the towering skyscrapers. The city was a nexus of commerce and intrigue, its bustling markets and dark alleys a stark contrast to the quiet ruins they had left behind. Marco led the way, his steps confident yet cautious. "We need to be careful here. The city's underbelly isn't too friendly to outsiders, and even less so to those poking around in prophecies and ancient weapons." Ethan adjusted the strap of his backpack, his eyes scanning the crowded streets. "Do you think we'll actually run into trouble just for looking into some old legend?" "It's not the legend that's the problem," Lyra replied, her voice low. "It's the power it represents. Some factions might see the sword as a threat to their control over the territories." As they made their way through a narrow alley, a shadow detached itself from the darkness, stepping into their path. The man was tall, his features hidden under a hood. "You need to stop your search," he said, his voice a gravelly warning. Ethan stopped in his tracks, his hand instinctively going to his belt where he kept a small defense tool. "Who are you to tell us what to do?" The hooded figure didn't move. "I'm someone who knows what the sword can do. It's not meant for you, or anyone." Before the situation could escalate, another figure appeared. This man was shorter, with a wiry build, his face open and earnest. "Let them be, Joran. They're not going to cause any trouble." Joran, the hooded man, turned to his interrupter with a snort. "You don't know that, Cale. You can't possibly understand." Cale ignored him, stepping closer to Ethan and his friends. "I apologize for my friend here. He's overly cautious, but perhaps with good reason. My name is Cale, and I think we can help each other." Marco looked between the two newcomers, assessing. "And why would you want to help us?" "Because I believe in the prophecy," Cale said simply. "And I know that there are those who would use the sword for ill. If it's going to be found, I'd rather it was in the hands of someone like you." Joran scoffed, but he stepped back, melting into the shadows once more. Cale watched him go, then turned back to the group. "There are others who will try to stop you. I can provide safe passage through the city and information. In exchange, I ask to be part of your journey." Lyra studied Cale for a moment, then nodded. "We accept your help, but understand, we're here for peace, not power." Cale smiled, a wry twist of his lips. "That's exactly why I chose to help you." With their new ally in tow, they navigated the intricate web of the city. Cale led them through less-traveled paths, sharing knowledge of local politics and the factions that might oppose them. Their destination was a secluded archive, rumored to hold the last piece of the map to the sword's location. As they entered the dimly lit building, Ethan felt a surge of anticipation. Inside, they were greeted by an archivist, an old Valerie whose eyes lit up at the mention of the sword. "Ah, the celestial blade. It's been long since anyone's come looking for that tale." With Cale's guidance and the archivist's knowledge, they uncovered ancient texts that depicted the sword's last known location, a forgotten temple on a distant moon. As they prepared to leave, Ethan turned to Cale. "Thanks for stepping in back there, and for guiding us." Cale shrugged, a glint of excitement in his eyes. "This is the most excitement I've had in years. Besides, I believe this is just the beginning." Indeed, as they left the archive, the pieces of their puzzle were coming together, but so were the players who would do anything to control the outcome. The journey to the temple promised not only answers, but also inevitable confrontations. Yet, with each step, the bonds between them, forged in shared purpose and newfound friendships, grew stronger. Chapter 5. The Map of Constellations. The hidden observatory was perched on the crest of a rugged mountain, its ancient stone walls blending seamlessly with the natural rock. The night sky here was a canvas of stars, undisturbed by the light pollution of the city. Ethan, Marco, Cale, and Lyra ascended the final slope, their breaths visible in the cold night air. "This place has been abandoned for centuries," Cale remarked, his voice echoing slightly in the open air. "But the star charts here are unmatched. If there's any place we can align the ancient map with current constellations, it's this." Marco grunted as he hauled up the last of their equipment. "Better be worth the climb. My legs are going to mutiny." Inside the observatory, the air was musty, filled with the scent of old stone and metal. The dome ceiling was open to the sky, the telescope's massive lens pointing toward the heavens. Ethan set up a portable digital projector, which cast the image of the ancient star map they'd found onto the observatory's wall. The map was a complex web of lines and dots, each star marked with meticulous care. Lyra unpacked a series of scrolls and old books, laying them out on a dusty table. These texts should help us translate the ancient star names to their modern equivalents. Cale leaned over the projector, adjusting the focus. There, you see. This cluster here is known today as the Nebulous Reach. It's a tricky area to navigate, but it matches the location on the map. Ethan stepped back, observing the overlay of the ancient map on the modern star charts. So the sword is somewhere in the Nebulous Reach. Great. Just the most perilous part of the galaxy. Marco laughed softly. When has that ever stopped us? They spent several hours comparing charts and plotting coordinates. The task was meticulous, requiring adjustments and recalculations, but the thrill of discovery spurred them on. At one point, Cale paused, rubbing his temples. "We're close. I can feel it. Just a bit more fine-tuning." Ethan joined him, pointing to a faintly marked star on the ancient map. "What about this one? It doesn't seem to have a modern counterpart." Lyra, who had been poring over an old text, looked up. "That's because it's not a star. According to this, it's a reflection of light from the sword itself. It was said to be made from a material that reflects the light of the closest star." Marco whistled, impressed. "So we're actually looking for a star that isn't a star. Brilliant." The breakthrough invigorated the team, and they quickly refined their search parameters. By the time the first light of dawn began to stain the sky, they had a solid lead. "We need to get to the Nebulous Reach," Ethan declared, rolling up the map. "If we leave by first light, we can reach the outer sectors by tomorrow." As they packed up their gear, the camaraderie between them was palpable. They were no longer just a group of strangers. They were a team, bound by a common goal and a shared sense of purpose. Cale clapped Ethan on the back as they stepped outside into the chilly morning. "This is it, my friend. We're on the brink of something great." Ethan nodded, looking out at the horizon where the sky met the stars. "Let's not keep destiny waiting then." With the map of constellations as their guide, the team descended the mountain, their spirits high. The Sword of Stars was no longer just a legend. It was a reality waiting to be discovered, and they were the ones destined to uncover it. Chapter 6. Journey Through the Nebula. Aboard the sleek spacecraft, the team prepared for the treacherous journey into the Nebulous Reach. The cockpit was bathed in the soft glow of instruments, casting eerie shadows on their faces as they plotted their course. "Navigating the Nebulous Reach isn't going to be easy," Cale warned, his hands steady on the controls. "The magnetic fields are unpredictable, and the starlight can be disorienting." Ethan leaned forward, watching the star map overlay on the navigation screen. "Just keep us on course. I'll manage the sensors." Marco strapped himself into a seat beside Lyra, his expression a mix of excitement and anxiety. "I've flown through asteroid fields and dodged comet tails, but this is new." Lyra smiled reassuringly at him. "We have the best possible team. If anyone can get us through this, it's us." As the ship entered the nebula, vibrant colors swirled around them, blues and greens mingling with streaks of crimson and gold. It was beautiful but dangerous, the beauty of the cosmos veiling the threats that lurked within. Ethan monitored the sensor array, calling out navigational adjustments to Cale. "Shift 15 degrees to starboard. There's a denser cluster of magnetic anomalies coming up." Cale adjusted their path, his eyes never leaving the front viewport. "Good catch. Keep those updates coming." The deeper they ventured, the more intense the magnetic fluctuations became. The ship shuddered occasionally, buffeted by invisible forces. Marco kept a close watch on the structural integrity readings. "Hull stress is within acceptable limits, but let's not push our luck," Marco reported, his voice steady despite the tension. During a particularly quiet moment, as they drifted through a less volatile section of the nebula, Lyra turned to Ethan. "You've been quiet. You all right?" Ethan glanced at her, a faint smile breaking through his concentration. "Just thinking about what's ahead. It's not every day you chase down a mythical sword in a nebula." Lyra laughed softly. "True. But I can't think of anyone else I'd rather be on this journey with." Their conversation was cut short as the ship suddenly lurched, a wave of magnetic energy stronger than the rest sweeping over them. "Everyone hold on!" Cale shouted, fighting to regain control. The turbulence passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving them shaken but unharmed. Cale let out a long breath, checking the instruments. "Everyone okay?" "Still in one piece," Marco confirmed, checking the systems. "Looks like everything's operational." As they continued their journey, the close calls brought them even closer together. Each member of the team played their part seamlessly, their actions a testament to their growing trust and camaraderie. Finally, as they neared the coordinates marked on their map, the nebula began to thin, revealing the stark void of space beyond. There, against the backdrop of distant stars, floated a small, unremarkable moon. Cale pointed to it, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "That's our destination. The resting place of the Sword of Stars." Ethan stood, joining Cale at the viewport, his eyes fixed on the moon. Hard to believe something so legendary could be hidden in such a plain sight. Marco clapped both men on the shoulders. "Well, believe it. We're about to make history." The ship exited the nebula, the stars shining brightly around them, their journey through the cosmic maelstrom behind them. Ahead lay their final destination, the culmination of their quest. With the nebula conquered and their goal within reach, the team prepared for the final phase of their adventure. Chapter 7. The Cave of Whispers. The small moon's surface was barren, the landscape marked only by craters and rocky outcrops. As their ship touched down, a cloud of dust billowed around them, the silence of the void pressing against the hull. Ethan, Marco, Cale, and Lyra donned their suits, preparing to step out into the unknown. "This is it, everyone," Ethan said, checking his gear one last time. "Whatever happens in there, we've done incredible work together." The team nodded, the weight of the moment settling on them as they opened the airlock and descended onto the moon's surface. The gravity was light, their steps buoyant as they made their way to the coordinates indicated by the ancient map. Cale led with a handheld scanner, its green light flickering over the uneven ground. The entrance should be just over this ridge. As they crested the hill, a wide, gaping entrance to a cave appeared, as if the moon itself was inviting them in. The air inside was cool and stale, the darkness complete beyond the reach of their helmet lights. Marco, ever the cautious one, checked his readings. "Atmosphere's stable, but let's keep our helmets on until we're sure it's safe." They moved deeper into the cave, their lights casting long shadows on the walls. The cave twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the moon. "According to the legends, the cave will test those who seek the sword," Lyra said, her voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. "Be on your guard." They encountered their first challenge soon after. A chasm split the path ahead, its depths lost in darkness. Cale, who had experience in spelunking, rigged a harness system to help them cross one by one. "Hold tight," he instructed as Ethan clipped on. "I've got you." Ethan nodded, taking a deep breath as he stepped off the edge, the rope holding him secure as he moved across the chasm. When he reached the other side, he helped secure the line for the others. Once they were all safely across, they continued, deeper and more cautious. The cave seemed to breathe around them, the walls whispering with the echoes of their steps. The next test was more personal. Illusions appeared, each tailored to their fears. Marco faced a vision of being lost in space, untethered and floating away. Cale saw the cave collapsing around him. Lyra confronted a spectre of the sword, accusing her of unworthiness. Ethan's illusion was the most intense, a vision of his colleagues doubting him, calling him a fraud. He pushed through it, reminding himself of the trust they had placed in each other. Each member of the team confronted and overcame their fears, drawn together by their shared experiences. They supported each other, their bond strengthening with each challenge. Finally, they reached the heart of the cave. A large, circular chamber opened up before them, the ceiling dotted with crystals that glowed softly in their light. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and atop it, the Sword of Stars. It was more beautiful than Ethan had imagined, its blade shimmering with a light that seemed to pulse in time with their heartbeats. He stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch it. As his fingers brushed the metal, the entire chamber brightened, the light from the sword casting brilliant patterns on the walls. It hummed softly, acknowledging its new master. "We did it," Ethan breathed, his voice filled with awe. He turned to his friends, their faces lit by the glow of the sword. "We actually did it." Marco clapped him on the back, a broad smile on his face. "We sure did, and I wouldn't have wanted to do this with anyone else." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes on the sword. "This is just the beginning. With the sword found, we can bring peace." Cale nodded, looking around the chamber. "And we faced it all together." The team gathered around the sword, their journey not just a quest for a mythical weapon, but a journey of trust, friendship, and courage. The Cave of Whispers had tested them, but together they had emerged victorious, ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 8. The Liberation of the Sword. The glow from the Sword of Stars cast a serene light over the chamber as the team prepared to leave the cave. With the sword now secured in a specially designed containment unit, Ethan felt a mix of relief and anticipation about what was to come. "We need to plan our next steps carefully," Ethan said, the weight of their discovery pressing upon him. Getting the sword was one thing, but ensuring it brings peace is going to be an entirely different challenge. Marco nodded, checking the readings on the containment unit. "First things first, we need to get off this moon and back to Valor. There are going to be a lot of eyes on us once word gets out." Lyra, who had been quiet, spoke up. "My people will want to see the sword, to know it is real. We will need to show them that it is not just a symbol of power but of unity." Cale adjusted his pack, his face serious. "There's also the matter of those who don't want the sword to unify anything. We should expect some resistance." As they made their way out of the cave, the journey back to their ship was uneventful but tense, each member of the team lost in their thoughts about the future. Once aboard, Ethan piloted them out of the moon's weak gravitational pull. The space around them was calm, the nebula's earlier threats now just a memory. But the real challenge lay ahead in navigating the political and social obstacles. "Once we land, I'll arrange a meeting with the High Council," Lyra said, her tone determined. "They need to hear from us, see the sword, and understand its significance." Marco looked over at Ethan. "And you, man, you pulled this off. You going to stick around for the aftermath?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I think my journey's not quite done yet. I've got a feeling there's more I can help with here." The trip back to Valor was quick, with the ship's advanced engines cutting through space. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, Ethan felt a surge of nervous energy. This was it, the moment of truth. Landing at the spaceport, they were met by a delegation from the Valerie High Council, their robes rich and colorful, faces a mix of curiosity and awe. "Welcome back, Lyra, and friends," one of the council members, an elder named Torin, greeted them. "We have heard of your quest and are eager to learn of your success." Lyra stepped forward, gesturing to the containment unit. "We have retrieved the Sword of Stars, as prophesied. But more importantly, we have proven that together, different peoples can achieve great things." Tauren's eyes widened as the containment unit was opened, revealing the sword. Murmurs ran through the crowd that had gathered, a mix of excitement and disbelief. Ethan watched, feeling oddly detached from the spectacle. He had done what he had set out to do, yet the real work was just beginning. As the council led them away to discuss the implications of their discovery, Marco leaned over to whisper to Ethan, "You know, for a guy who didn't believe in prophecies, you sure seem to have fulfilled this one pretty well." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. Maybe there's something to them after all. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings and presentations. Ethan stayed by Lyra's side, helping to navigate the complex social dynamics of valor. The sword was a powerful symbol, but it was their united front that began to mend old wounds and forge new alliances. As the sun set on valor, casting long shadows over the city, Ethan stood beside Lyra, looking out over the landscape. "You think it will hold? The peace?" Lyra smiled, taking his hand. "With you here, I believe it has a good chance." Together they watched the stars appear, the sky darkening but filled with light. The Sword of Stars was more than a myth. It was a catalyst, and with it they had begun to carve a path toward a peaceful future.